What's cracking people, I'm TheArtSide, this is Slimehouse TV, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how I got on in this year's 2025 Big Bot Bash collaboration. I recently received an invite from Bill about taking part in the challenge this year, and although I don't scratch build very often, in fact I haven't done any scratch building since the last Big Bot Bash, I do find it very hard to say no to Bill making stuff. If you watched last year's video, you'll know that the robot that I made was quite ambitious. I went on quite the journey to get it finished, and this year's robot was no different. I had to do some kit bashing, some scratch building, some laser cutting, some sculpting, some painting, and then also I had to bend the rules just a little bit. It'll make sense when you watch the video. Just a little bit, not too much, but yeah, it'll all make sense. So if all that sounds like a bit of you, then as always, sit back, make sure you're comfy, and get yourself strapped in for my Big Bot Bash entry of 2025. Let's do this. So the Big Bot Bash of 2024 was by far the biggest collaboration that I've ever been a part of. Hosted by Bill of Bill Making Stuff, it allowed me to really test myself as a scratch builder, work alongside a bunch of good friends, make new ones, and build something really cool that I would have never made otherwise. So when Bill announced that he were doing it all over again for 2025, you know that I had to answer the call. And just like last year, it involves a bunch of very talented creatives from all over the world, all making their own scratch-built robots and creating videos about them in their own individual styles. Now if you watch my channel, you'll know that I rarely do any scratch building. I'm a toy designer. I specialise in toy production. I 3D sculpt, I print, I create multiples, I do Japanese style sofubi and retro style action figures, and I very rarely make anything that I couldn't, if I wanted to, get mass produced. So for me, the Big Bot Bash means that I have to fully step outside my comfort zone and create something that I'm not used to doing and that you're not used to seeing me do on the channel. This year though, I did have a bit of a secret weapon, something that was going to help me shake things up a little bit, and I'm not going to get into what it is right now, but it definitely helped me make this year's entry real different to anything else that I've ever scratch built. Also, like last year, the thing that I would be making would all have attributes determined by Bill's junk bot generator. So before I could do anything, I had to roll some dice and let fate decide what kind of bot I was going to be bashing.
Body, too many wires. Head, he looks dangerous. Arms, armored. Hands, grip. Legs, triple jointed. Flavor, beaten. Attributes chosen. Get ready for the Big Bot Bash.
So now that I had a vague idea of what I was going to be building, I went about getting together all of my boxes of scratch building material / Big Bot Bash fodder. Now I did have quite a bit to work with, not just because I tend to save any little bit of junk that could be useful, but if you've watched any of my previous videos or even just last year's Big Bot Bash, you'll know that I've got quite a big collection of random spare action figure accessories that I've gathered over the years of being a vintage toy collector, and although I would never use anything of any value, I still put to one side stuff that isn't worth anything or is broken or has future scratch building potential, so I also had a bunch of that stuff to use as well. So what I've got here is a bunch of junk and just random stuff that I've been saving up over the past 12 months specifically for this project. And I'm trying to look for anything that's like an interesting shape that might work well for my robot. Also doubles. I'm looking for things that are doubles, things that are symmetrical. So I'm just going to put a bunch of stuff in a pile that I think is going to be helpful. I've got a little bit of an idea in mind of what I want to create. And hopefully in the next few hours I can do a bit of dry fitting, maybe a bit of gluing, and start putting something together that looks remotely like what I've got in my mind pictured for this Big Bot Bash of 2025. So I went ahead and started searching through my boxes of Ramel, trying to find stuff that looks like it could be suited to this year's build. One thing I was certain of is that I was going to make this year's guy way smaller than last year's guy, because although I was really happy with how it turned out, creating a model at that scale, which I think was like 19 inches in the end, made finding parts that I could use so much harder and limited me in lots of ways that I could hopefully avoid this time round if I made something just a little bit smaller. I would though, like last year, be using a bit of Kinex for the main skeleton of the robot. Not for all of it, but definitely for the legs. As I mentioned before, for legs I rolled triple jointed, which is actually a look that I've always really liked on robots. Those Ed 209 style legs that bend back on themselves are a design that I've always been a big fan of, and by using connects I could hopefully make sure that I built them perfectly symmetrical, which would definitely help me later on, because once you start putting a bunch of stuff on these robots and they get a bit of weight to them, they can end up toppling over very easily. Now this thing here, this robot transformer, which is basically just a bootleg Bionicle figure that I got from the cheap rack toys section of my local corner shop. I've got a few of these, and for this build they ended up being worth their weight in gold. Not only because they had lots of really nice symmetrical armour pieces, but also because they came with pre-made detachable posable armature sockets, something that you'll see come in real handy for a very specific part of this project later on in the video. Something else as well that's probably important to note before I get too deep into this build is that when I make something like this, I just get in the zone and grab whatever looks useful and start sticking it together. I don't really tend to go through every single individual part that I've used or anything like that like some other creators might do, and rather than me trying to do a tutorial or a how-to or anything like that, a video like this for me is much more about me documenting my little journey and taking you lot at home that are watching along for the ride with me. Now this was only the first evening of me starting work on this, and I didn't really plan on doing too much, just having a little bit of a tinker and seeing what I came up with before I started working on it properly. But surprisingly, working in this smaller scale and having a bunch of parts there all ready got me really inspired, and in just one night I ended up getting so much more done than what I'd expected to. I was only in the studio for a few hours, but I made some really good progress, which was definitely going to help me in the long run, because as always I had nowhere near as much time to get this thing made as I would have liked to, and this little head start was definitely going to be very helpful. So last night, I was on it, I was at it. I only expected to like put a little bit of it together, just put some stuff to one side, maybe do a bit of dry fitting, a bit of gluing, just get something together that looked kind of like the idea that I had in my head for it. But I ended up pretty much putting together a good 80% of it. As I've mentioned, the robot that I'm building this year is a lot smaller than the one that I did last year, so that's been very helpful. And although I've still got to do the back and the head and the hands and stuff, I've still made a lot of progress on this thing, which I'm really happy about, because it's only been one night and already I'm so much further ahead than I were this time last year when I was doing this. Which is actually quite a bit more helpful than you'd think, because this year I'm not just scratch building a robot, I'm actually going to do some sculpting on top of it. The sculpting, that side of things, is probably also going to be the longest part of the process of this. So what I'm going to do for the rest of the day is just concentrate on bulking out the rest of it and then adding the greeblies and the fine details, which is why I'm going through this box of Lego. And although I'm not using any rare pieces or anything like that, anything that I know goes to a specific kit, when it comes to like just standard blocks of it and like the little tiny panels and things that there's thousands and thousands made for lots of different kits, then to me they're fair game. I've also got stuff like this horrendous thing that I got from the charity shop, which is all fake Lego, but it's got some really nice curves and shapes and nice flat edges that don't have the Lego logo on or anything like that, so they're going to be really handy for filling in gaps and like little bits of paneling and things. So hopefully by the end of today, I'll have the body at least all ready for me to start being able to put some milliput and some green stuff on it and stuff, because like I said, that sculpting side of things is really going to take a long time, I reckon. So while I was searching through that box of Lego, which is just a bunch of stuff that my dad's picked up on house clearances, old and new pieces all mixed up together, I found these random things. And I don't know if they're supposed to be roof tiles off an old Tente Kids playset or pieces of toy trees or something like that, but what I do know is that they were super handy for my big bot bash. When I'm scratch building a machine like this, I always like it to look like every part of it has a reason for being there. I don't want the arms and the legs and the chest to all look mismatched and like they came from a bunch of different places, unless that's the look of course, but for this figure I wanted it to somewhat look like it all came from the same factory. So by having a bunch of these panels that were all the same, I could glue them all over the body in different areas as armoured plating and hopefully make everything look nice and unified. Also, because of the shape that they were, when they were stuck together, they almost created a sort of futuristic geometric pattern, which was cool and definitely gave the robot an overall look and feel that it wouldn't have had otherwise. Something else that also fit with them nicely as well was some offcuts of wood. These are just what I'd got left over from the laser cut bolt gun inspired playset that I did in my last episode. Some triangular shaped bits, showing again why I struggle to throw anything away because at some point I always end up finding a use for them. And because at this point he was starting to look a little bit like a samurai, I also made him a little Kusazuri style piece of plated armour to hang down from his belt. I hit this with a heat gun to bend it a little bit and give it some movement, and then I also made it removable by attaching some tiny magnets to it, again for reasons that'll become a bit more clear later on in the episode. So this is a bunch of the pieces that came with that horrid Skibbity Toilet bootleg Lego set, or guilt-free Lego as I like to call it, because I never enjoyed destroying the real stuff. And this had lots of little flat surface areas and multiples of them, all real good things for building up layers and armor plating panels. These little circular pieces are also really good for making end caps and stuff, and because now I'd basically got all the skeleton of this thing made, it was just a case of adding details and placing little pieces and greeblies around here and there, anywhere that looked bare, anywhere that looked blank, and anywhere that looked like it could just do with a little bit of something. So at this point, I'd pretty much got the whole thing, other than his hands, which I would come back to later, scratch built, and it was time to start adding some green stuff. Now there were lots of open areas on this guy at this point that all needed to be filled in. Luckily, one of my other roles was too many wires, which gave me a real good excuse to be able to fill in all those areas with a bunch of tubes and pipes. And rather than use real wires, I decided to go with green stuff, just so that I had maximum control over thicknesses and where I was putting them. So green stuff, to anybody that doesn't know, is a two-part epoxy that you mix together until it's green and cures nice and tough after a few hours. And out of all of the different epoxies that you can use for sculpting, I find this one the easiest to work with and the one that holds the best detail. Now originally I was planning to do a lot more sculpting on top of this thing, but because I liked the way that it looked now and I didn't want to mess with it too much, I decided to just go with interior pipes and wires. And the way that I made them was using one of these green stuff texture rollers. Now this is a super simple design, it's basically a flat plate with a rigid texture along it, and when you roll out a sausage of green stuff with it, you instantly get a perfect little pipe. I've also used these before on Nurgle and Deathguard for Warhammer for little worms and maggots, and are overall just a really satisfying little tool for this kind of thing. People sometimes use a comb for it as well, and I do also have some better ones of these, and I could have probably got the pipes looking a little bit more detailed, but these are the only ones that I could find out at the time, and time was ticking, so I just got on with it knowing that they were all going to look good when they were painted anyway. So in my experience, green stuff, this two-part epoxy, takes about 4 hours to dry. So what I'm going to do is roll out more of these pipes and then leave them to cure halfway, like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then start feeding them through the legs and the arms and the body. I don't want to squish them or get thumbprints on them or anything like that or damage them, so I figured if they're half cured, then they will feed through nice, be a little bit flexible and durable, but I won't damage them. And what this is going to do is not only give the figure a little bit more structural integrity, but it's also going to fill in any gaps. I want to fill in the majority of the gaps on this thing. I'll explain why later, because there's a reason for that. But hopefully this should work really well. So I'm just going to roll out a bunch more of these, use up the rest of this green stuff probably, and then hopefully it doesn't mess up, because I really like how it's looking so far, and I don't want to ruin it. So once I'd given them a couple of hours to cure, I then carefully started feeding the pipes through any open areas and anywhere that they look like they might fit or drape. And it was quite hard to film this, so I decided to turn the camera off and just crack on with them. And part of these were going to get covered up later by some other armoured plating that I'd got ready to one side. But I was still really pleased with how they were looking, and I felt like they definitely helped play into the too many wires aesthetic. I'm also a big fan of the Horizon franchise and how the machines look in that game, and I always enjoy robots and mech suits and stuff that have elements of them that look organic, so I definitely felt like they also gave off a bit of that vibe as well. Now before I could add any more pipes to the arms, I had to make the hands. Now for hands, I rolled grip, which I felt could be interpreted in so many different ways and was a real easy way of basically just making whatever I wanted. So I used a mix of bootleg Lego with some other stuff, some beads, some bits of broken toys that I'd taken apart, and I also went for just 3-fingered hands because I think 3-finger hands always look cool and a little bit alien, and also because making 3 fingers is a lot easier than making 5, and I wanted to do anything that would help speed up this build because there was still so much more to do on this project. Now I've been doing a lot of laser cutting recently, and so many times while I was using this thing I was thinking, I wish I had this for last year's bot bash. It would have been so handy, being able to cut out any shape that I wanted. Now this time round I really didn't run into any issues with the build or the armor plating, but I still wanted to make use of this thing on this year's bot purely because I could, even if it just meant cutting out a few extra little panel pieces and adding a little bit of extra detail here and there. And for what it's worth, even though they were tiny little things, I still think they worked really well. Now recently, I was watching some videos of a dude called Night Shift, and I love how he textured his armor plating on his tanks and how he made them look like they were all cut out rough and crude on old school machines. And with my flavour being beaten, I thought it'd be a good excuse for me to try out a little bit of that technique on my robot. And for this, I used a couple of products that I actually got given to me by our friend Pez from Rubicon Models. Some perfect plastic putty, which is a type of filler used for filling gaps on model kits, and plastic magic, which is a type of plastic welding liquid. And by mixing them together, it creates a really nice texture paste. Now I was just kinda dabbing this on without thinking about it too much. Not all over the robot, I didn't want the whole thing to have this texture, just the main big surface exposed areas. And I'll be honest, I did kinda make a bit of a dog's dinner of this. When Night Shift does it, he's way neater and makes it look a lot better and more professional. And looking back, I can't even remember why I was doing it so messy. Probably just because I felt rushed and I knew that it needed to get done. Again though, because this guy had to look beaten, I knew that it really wouldn't end up being too much of a problem in the long run anyway. And I also knew that even if I wasn't 100% happy with how it were looking, it was still fun to try out something new and test out a new technique, and I definitely learnt lots just from doing this little bit for when I do this again on a different project in the future. So after all that had dried, the next part was the light sanding stage. And what this does is take away any rough spiky areas on the surface and anywhere that looks like it's been spackled on with a brush and smooths it all out of it. The look that I was trying to go for here was cast iron, so I wanted it to look pitted and old, but all still kinda polished. So for this I just sanded it all down using some real fine grit sandpaper, using these little texture sticks that I use for Gundam kits, and these are really good because they come in different shapes, so you can get into any area that would be hard to reach normally. You can also replace the sandpaper on them as well when you've worn them down, and for what I was using them for here, they were perfect. Once that was all done, the final stage was to add little cut marks down all of the edges of the armor plating. I wanted to try and make the metal look like it had been cut out crudely, like the kind of cutting that you see on old World War II vehicles and stuff. Not that this robot is set in World War II or anything like that, I just think it looks cool, and again it was a nice excuse to try it. And for this I used my Dremel, just carefully running down the edges with a little engraving head and then sanding it all down after so that it was smooth. This is again a similar technique to something that I've seen Night Shift do before, and much like the texture paste, I didn't do it nowhere near as good as he did. The finished results though weren't too bad, not exactly what I was going for, but not a complete failure, and again something that I'll definitely look at trying to be better at in the future. Side note as well, Night Shift is a guy that I would love to see in the next big bot bash, so if you know him, give him a nudge, tell him to holler Bill Making Stuff on Instagram or something, because I can imagine if he was part of this collab, he would absolutely crush it. So it is currently day 6 of working on this project. I took the morning off today, the afternoon off. I went to the cinema with my friend Jace. We went to see the new Gundam movie. Enjoyed it a lot. I'd say it's a movie. It's more like an extended first episode of the new series that's going to be dropping on Amazon Prime. But it was really good to see it on the big screen. Always nice to see anime in the cinema. And I actually even got invited to the UK premiere by Bandai a few days ago down in London, but I couldn't make it. So it was nice to still be able to see it in a cinema setting. But while we're on the subject of big mechanical death machines, I've got one right here in front of me that's just about ready for some priming. And I'll be honest, I'm not fully convinced that the texture paint worked. I'm not fully convinced that I've got something here that I'm happy with, and it's going to be hard to really tell until I start painting it. But before I do that, I've got to start obviously priming the thing. I've got to spray it all with a colour that ties everything together. Now I'm going to be hitting this guy with a white primer, and that's not even necessarily the right colour that I want to be using in order to paint on top of to get the best results, but it is the colour that I've got to spray it in order for my secret weapon to work. Now I did mention at the start of this video that I'd got a little bit of a secret weapon, and it's not even a little secret weapon. It's something that is kind of overwhelming. It's something that I've never done before, I've never used before, but if it works, it will not only make this video and this project hopefully very different to everybody else's, but in the future will help me take my projects to the next level and also help me learn a whole new skill that I've never ever used before. So before it gets too dark, I'm going to get out of these clothes, I'm going to put my scrubs on, and I'm going to get him outside and start hitting him with some white primer. I'm hoping that I've not ruined it, I'm hoping that it brings everything together nice, I'm hoping it doesn't show too many mistakes, and also that it's the right colour and the right finish that I need in order for it to be compatible with my secret weapon. Let's see how we get on. So as you know, digital sculpting and 3D printing are both things that are not allowed in the Big Bot Bash. Everything you do has to be hand sculpted or kit bashed or scratch built, and with me being primarily a 3D sculptor and printer, I always feel like I'm sort of at a disadvantage because the thing that I practice the most is the thing that's banned from the collaboration. And as much as I enjoy scratch building and it's nice to make a one-off piece from time to time, because I come from more of a mindset of toy production and making multiples, this year I wanted to incorporate something into my Bot Bash entry, something that kinda bent the rules a bit but at the same time also didn't. Because although I'm not allowed to make my robot digitally, there's nothing in the rules that says that I can't reverse engineer my scratch built robot and turn it into something digital afterwards. So this year, that's exactly what I plan to do. So allow me to introduce my Big Bot Bash 2025 secret weapon, freshly delivered courtesy of Revopoint, my new Miraco 3D scanner. Now 3D scanning is something that I've been wanting to get into for the longest time. I'm always blown away when I see examples of this technology, and it seemed like this was the perfect opportunity for me to finally dive in and learn how it all works. Now when I were doing a bit of research on what would be the best brand of scanner to get for what I do, Revopoint is the one that kept coming up. It's the one that I heard everybody mention when they were talking about 3D scanning, so I felt super lucky and privileged to be able to receive this Miraco from Revopoint to test out. It arrived really quick, it came nicely packaged, it also came with a bunch of different accessories, including a rotating base, and this statue so that you've got something to practice on straight away. Also, the scanner itself is very nice looking, almost feeling like a DSLR or mirrorless camera, something that I'm very familiar with, so automatically it was something that I felt a bit more confident learning how to use. So this is the reason that I had to make sure I could take the robot apart, because I knew it were going to be easier to scan all its various pieces individually than if it was one thing. It's the reason why I had to make sure that it had minimum gaps and open areas so that the scanner could pick it up, and it's also the reason why it had to be white, because from my research what I did, and also as you can see by the statue head, a matte white finish is the best surface for this type of 3D scanning. Now the first initial tests of me scanning the statue head and stuff and just trying to learn how to do it, I didn't capture on camera. Time was ticking for me to get this project wrapped up, and filming everything always takes 10 times longer. So the following day I came back after a little bit of experience now of how the technology worked and how to get the best results, and set about trying to tackle the 3D scanning of my scratch built robot. Something that I was aware of as well is that I was learning all this on hard mode. The model that I were attempting to scan here, even though it was sprayed matte white and even though I'd tried to fill most of the gaps in, was still very complex and had a bunch of undercuts and areas that the scanner just weren't going to be able to pick up. So I wasn't expecting to get something that was absolutely perfect, and I would be happy just getting something that was a vague shape of what I'd made that I could then try and clean up in the 3D sculpting software after. So this was all stuff that I was well prepared for before I started this, and was in the mind frame of whatever I managed to get I would try and work with. Now I tried different ways of doing this scanning. I tried it on a tripod, I also tried it handheld. The scanner has different settings as well, so you can scan near and far, and even though I didn't really have too much experience and the thing that I was trying to scan was really complex and wasn't a great piece to be trying this out on, I was actually getting some very fly results. As I mentioned as well, I was also scanning everything in separate parts, which did take longer but made the whole task a lot more manageable, and if I did do any scans that didn't quite come out right, it was easy to delete them and start again. And obviously some pieces were more simple, so they scanned easier than others, but overall it were kinda crazy how well the machine could pick up the detail and the surface space, and also the way that you can instantly look at it on the scanner and move it around with the touchscreen made the whole thing feel very user friendly. Another thing that I really like about this Miraco is that you don't have to connect it to a laptop or a computer. You can if you want. You do transfer stuff over at the end when you've finished so you can clean it up and stuff, but because of the built-in interface, you're able to do a lot of work in the actual scanner itself, which is good for someone like me that doesn't like cables and wires trailing all over the floor when you're working and having to do lots of back and forth. Another awesome feature as well is that you can scan a single object from multiple different angles and then take all the best bits, put them into Revopoint software, and using a feature called Merge, you can Frankenstein together all the best bits to get the clearest and best end result possible. You can also cut away any little extra elements that it's picked up and smooth everything out and play around with the settings to get the best results that suit what you need, which in my case was just something simple that I could then work on cleaning up later. And even though this was just after a day of me playing around with the scanner and the software, I was very happy with the results and definitely knew that if I'd have had more time to spend on it, I would have been able to master this so much more. Like, I was getting better results on stuff that I'd scanned a few hours after I started, and if I wasn't on such a deadline, I'm confident that I would have gotten an even better scan of this thing than I did, and I was happy with the one that I'd got. So obviously this isn't a tutorial or anything like that, this is just my first initial test of playing around with this thing, and as somebody that's never done it before and had no idea how good it were going to work, I can honestly say that I was super impressed with my end results. Me being able to reverse engineer my big bot bash this year was a little idea that I thought would be fun to try out, and the fact that I was now doing it and it was working successfully was very awesome. Now I am going to be doing another follow-up video after this, a separate episode deep diving into this Miraco and the software and the whole practice of 3D scanning and covering it way better and in way more depth. I'm going to be going over a bunch of the features that I didn't get a chance to talk about in this segment. I'm also going to attempt to scan some stuff that's a lot more scanner friendly, not big and complex with loads of open spaces and shadows like my big bot bash, so I'm really looking forward to getting into that and seeing what results we can get, because if this is anything to go by, I'm going to be able to do some crazy stuff with this machine. Now in terms of the results of this scan here, how it came out, how it cleaned up, and if I was able to successfully 3D print a version of it, I'm going to be showing all that later on in the episode. But if you do like the look of this machine and you want to check one out for yourself, then I do have an affiliate link that I'll put down below in the description. I can say though, honestly, after just a day of using this thing, I'm now brimming with ideas. This thing has so much potential. I've got some really cool stuff in mind for how I'm going to be able to incorporate this tech into my work in the future, and I'm just very excited to see where this new skill takes me. Right, so it's finally time to start putting some paint on this thing, and the colour that I'm going for is like a bright, toxic 90s action figure green. Now I did pick up this kind of graffiti dupe spray paint and I was going to use this, but I've done a little test on one of the pieces on the leg, and although I really like the colour, this kind of paint is really thick and unforgiving. I painted the pink horror with this recently, one of them, and I had nothing but trouble with it, especially when it were coming to like cutting back and trying to get into little areas that the spray paint wouldn't reach and stuff. So I'm going to try and replicate replicate this colour, but I'm not going to use this spray paint, not for this, because I can't afford to mess it up. But I do really like the colour, so I've got a bunch of paints here that will hopefully mix the right colour that I need and get something close to this. I was also going to prime the whole thing black first, but I think I'm just going to go straight in with a green and then paint in the black details after. So as planned, I took a bunch of the different paints that I'd got out ready and started mixing together a real nice vibrant green colour. Now I ended up mixing one that I was very happy with, and although it was not an exact match to the spray paint that I were basing this colour on, if anything it was a better colour. So after getting the model prepared and blocking up the articulation pegs so that they didn't get clogged up with paint, I added the freshly mixed colour to the airbrush and started laying down the first layer. And instantly I could see just how striking and bright this were going to look, and right then I knew that the white undercoat was definitely the way to go. Now when it comes to paint jobs on robots, personally, I always like super bright colours. I talked a lot about my inspirations in the previous Big Bot Bash video and the types of toys and model kits that I grew up with that influence the kind of toys that I make and the way that I paint them. I was born in the 80s and I grew up in the 90s, and back then, toys just seemed to have this awesome vibrant colour palette, and when I think of robots and mech suits, that's always the type of look that's my instant go-to. And the reason that I wanted to go for a bright green robot was literally because I haven't done one before. I've done figures in the past that were green but never this tone, so like a lot of the stuff that I've done in this video, again it was just a nice excuse to do it. I often look at my toy shelf of all the retro style action figures that I've created over the past couple of years, and I have a think about what colour is missing, what colour palette have I not yet explored, and when I've got free reign to paint something, whatever colour scheme I want, this is always a real nice way to help me make that decision. Now whenever I make something that's original, I like to create a little bit of lore for it and explain the idea behind where the character could have come from, what their story is. So while I paint this guy in true Bill Making Stuff style, I wanted to give you a little bit of his backstory. So in some crazy distant future, there's a spacecraft racing circuit that's been running for over a century. Now this is a really high speed, high stakes spectacle. It looks a lot like the old PlayStation game Wipeout, and these vibrant hover racing vehicles tear across these giant winding, twisting air tracks. Now these vehicles are called skates, and they're the stars of the sport. Unlike Formula 1 or the Grand Prix or something like that, where the drivers are the faces of the competition, in this world, in this galaxy, it's the skates themselves that are the icons. And so the fans and the people that follow the sport root for the ships and not the pilots. The drivers and navigators remaining completely faceless, just another part of the machine sat inside them. Now each skate requires a two-person crew, one pilot handling the driving and then the other guy acting as like a navigator slash engineer, but instead of steering wheels or control panels or anything like that, the racers are actually directly plugged into the ship's mainframe via neuro implants, allowing them to pilot the skates with their minds, and they form these symbiotic links with their skatecraft, becoming almost like one with the vehicle. Now there is kinda a really messed up side to this, because over time, these neural links, they take a heavy toll on the pilot's brains and they burn out after just a few years, their minds like fried beyond repair. And this is why the drivers remain anonymous and they're constantly replaced, and the skates themselves remain in the spotlight, immortalised through branding, merchandising and legacy. A true legendary skate as well can race for decades, even centuries. Also, with so much money flying about in this sport, from sponsorships to underground gambling, match fixing, sabotage, it's no surprise that criminal syndicates are also involved in it, races are rigged, pilots are bought off, and skates are even targeted sometimes for destruction. Now during one particular race, one of these attacks takes place and a massive explosion rips through the track right before a bunch of skates reach the finish line, hitting pretty much all of them, including one called Skyfang. So Skyfang is a bright green Mark 1 skate and one of the oldest ships that's still in competition. Now this isn't even actually a destructive weapon that's being used on the skates, it's something called a portal bomb, which is a device that's meant to swallow up whatever it catches in its radius and teleport it to a different controlled location, but for some reason the coordinates that are supposed to transfer Skyfang malfunction, and instead of being transported to a criminal syndicate's hold, the ship is sent flying across the cosmos and it ends up landing millions of miles away on this crazy hostile jungle planet, which is actually the same planet where the Swamp Assault Turgo story took place, if you remember that story from last year. Now inside Skyfang, when it crash landed, there were two pilots. One of them a convict racing to reduce his prison sentence, and the other one was a really clever engineer. and although they were both battered and bruised, somehow they managed to survive. But by this point they'd found themselves stranded in this world inhabited by all this crazy hostile wildlife, giant leeches, car-sized mosquitoes, basically a ton of very vicious, poisonous, toxic swamp creatures. The skate's totaled as well, it's destroyed, it'll never fly again, but both these guys refuse to give up. So using the little maintenance tool that's on board the skate with a plasma welder, they spend a couple of weeks repurposing the remains of the skate, building it into this towering 12-foot tall defense mech. Its armor all made from salvaged skate plating, its inner wiring exposed and messy. Also at the center of its head as well, they fit like a rhino horn, the ship's power crystal, which is a priceless near indestructible energy source, and also likely the very reason that criminals tried to steal all them skates in the first place. The crystal's not just a power core as well, it can also concentrate these huge energy blasts, making the machine at its core a very effective defense robot. So for weeks, all three of them fight off waves and waves of monstrous creatures, using their new mech to smash, blast and tear through anything that comes near them. Survival though on this planet is pretty impossible. The air's super toxic, making it unlivable for humans beyond a few months. Even worse, the thick atmosphere blocks out all signals, meaning that this distress beacon that they've also built never reaches anyone. And eventually, the two pilots succumb to the planet, dying inside this little makeshift cave that they created. Like, they'd never make it off this planet, basically. Now even though both pilots were dead, while they were alive they were still using the Neuralink that was intact with the robot, doing what they could to teach it basic instincts, how to defend, how to fight, how to protect, even though their consciousness never fully transferred because a skate is only supposed to understand simple commands. So long after both those pilots are dead and have perished, the mech still remained at its post. So for 6 years it stood guard outside the cave, defending two skeletons, completely unaware that they're dead, that they're gone, every day still fighting, slaughtering anything that dares to approach it, from swamp beasts to pirates and also now bounty hunters, because word has spread. Rumours of this lost skate have reached far and wide and people have started turning up trying to capture it. Some want it for its legendary status, a Mark 1 skate, one of the originals, worth a lot of money. Some want the power crystal that's lodged in its head, but so far nobody's been able to claim it, and now it's kind of become like a legend in its own right, this unstoppable warrior with no master and no fear, unwavering loyalty to these two men that died years ago, and so it remains, smashing and destroying and energy blasting anybody that comes looking for it, still waiting, still fighting, still protecting. And that is the story of this guy, Skyfang, or Landfang as they now call it, because obviously it'll never fly again. But that's his story. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it gives you a little bit of context as to why he looks the way that he does. So without further ado, I'm going to wrap this section up so I can finally show you my finished piece, all painted, lacquered and all ready for his final reveal. There you have it, my Big Bot Bash entry of 2025, and I've got to say, I think he's alright. Is it my favourite thing that I've ever made? Probably not, and like I said at the start of this video, I'm not really a scratch builder. It's not my forte, it's not something that I do very often, so it's just something that, yeah, I attempt now and again and get mixed results, I suppose. As you know, if you watch my videos as well, I don't ever really do weathering on my figures or anything like that because I come from an angle of toy production. All my colouring is always like solid block base colours when I do my figures. So weathering is not something that I do very often. I do it on the dioramas and the backgrounds, but never on the actual figures. So it's always something that when I do, I feel like I should have spent more time on. When I see people do weathering on YouTube who are like really good at it, they spend a long time on every individual piece, and I would have liked to have spent longer on this thing, but obviously time just wasn't on my side making this thing. When you're doing a big bot bash, you never have enough time. I also feel like doing the weathering kind of muted the green and the pink quite a bit, a little bit more than I would have liked. And I did stare at this thing for quite a while and considered just keeping it in the solid block colours before I weathered it, but it just kind of looked very unfinished. So although it doesn't really match with any of the other figures that I've created or the ones on my shelf that I make, that I paint in a certain way, every toy kinda has to be seen on its own merit. And I think in the long run, weathering is something that this really did need in order to make it feel finished and completed. I would have also liked to have given him some kind of weapon, but that's just something again that I didn't get time to do. But I think overall, it's a pretty cool figure, and yeah, I'm quite proud of it. As you know as well, during this project, I also attempted to 3D scan this thing, and I said that I'd let you know at the end of the video how that went. Well, I'm very pleased to say that it went very, very well. So what I've got here is the 3D scanned and 3D printed version of it. So when I said that I were bending the rules ever so slightly, this is just what I meant, because obviously you're not allowed to 3D print in this challenge, but there's nothing saying I can't 3D print a scanned version of my kit bashed robot, and I'm so happy with how it turned out. Now don't get me wrong, this wasn't just a plug and play thing, it wasn't just a case of scanning this guy and then printing out a version. I did have to do quite a bit of cleanup, but because I'm a 3D sculptor, it's something that wasn't too much of a challenge to me, and some bits cleaned up easier than others. I also adjusted a few parts of it and altered the articulation and stuff, but overall I do feel like I accomplished the mission that I set out for myself when I came up with this idea. Now this guy came off the printing plate this morning. I've not had a chance to clean up any of his support marks or anything like that. And also, even looking at it now, there's a few little alterations that I'd like to make just to get this thing perfect. But what I am going to do, if it's not up there already, it will be up there in a few days. I'm going to upload the STL of this guy on my Patreon so that people can download it, they can see it in person, they can paint their own version of it. And obviously now that I've got a 3D print of this thing, I can do the solid block colour version that I wanted to do as well. So I've kind of got the best of both worlds now. So if you want to get involved, then make sure you head over to patreon.com/SlimeHouseTV. Check out this guy and the other exclusive STLs that I drop on there, and everything else that I do through Patreon that helps me keep the channel going and helps me make this brand and what I do here bigger and better than ever. I really hope that you've enjoyed this video today. I'd love to know what you think of my robot, and if you had a good time with it and you enjoyed the vibe of the challenge, then make sure you check out everybody else that's involved in the collaboration, because like I said, there's people from all over the world doing this, all making some very awesome robots. I also want to say a big shouts to Bill for getting me involved as always. I also want to say a massive shouts to Revopoint for sending me the Miraco scanner and allowing me to add a whole new skill set to my arsenal. Like I said, I am going to do another video exploring it much more in depth. I've also got some other really cool stuff planned that's dropping on the channel. I was at ChillCon last week with Dan and Bill, so I've got a video on that coming out. I've got loads of studio update stuff to show you and more Sofubi things, loads and loads going on here at Slimehouse. So if this is your first time checking out the channel, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Go back and binge the back catalogue, because if you enjoyed today's video, you're probably going to enjoy the other stuff that I drop on here as well. So as always, I just want to say a massive thank you for checking out my video today. With all of the other stuff that you could be watching on YouTube, it really does mean a lot that you come back here every single week and check out Slimehouse TV, and I hope to catch you in the next video. So until then, I'm Theo Kane, this is Slimehouse TV. This is my Big Bot Bash entry of 2025, and until the next episode, I'm gone. Pow.